Hello, this is Wally with Supreme Gecko. I've kept over 100 geckos, and one of my favorite geckos is Paroedura picta. Welcome to part 2 of the series on Paroedura picta, and today we're going to be covering how to set them up and how to care for Paroedura picta. So where does Paroedura picta rank in my top geckos that I've ever kept? Well, I did a video a couple of years ago and Paroedura picta ranked pretty high, but to find out exactly where they ranked, check here. They might be number 1. You might be surprised. I enjoy these geckos so much that I decided to do a series on Paroedura picta. 6 parts. The first one we already did, and again, I'll put the link right here for that one. That covers the background and history of Paroedura picta, and it gives a lot of information, so make sure that you watch that video too. Again, this is number 2 video in that series, and today we'll be covering the care and setup of Paroedura picta. Number 3 will be on breeding. Number 4 will be on taking care of the babies. Number 5 will be basic daily care for Paroedura picta. And number 6 I'm really excited about. It's going to be on the different morphs for Paroedura picta. Let me take about 20 seconds and go back and cover some very basic information from that very first video. Paroedura picta are from Madagascar, and Madagascar has a very diverse biotype, which means that Paroedura picta are very adaptable. They are terrestrial, but they love to climb on things. Their temperature range is pretty consistent, but room temperature is fine for an ambient temperature. So let's talk about their setup, and today we're going to be talking about 2 different setups. 1, a more naturalistic setup, and 2, a breeder setup. Now for a breeder setup, wait a minute, I think I already covered this. Watch this video. I did a breeder setup in under a minute. Take a look at this one, but today we're going to cover some more basics and a different look at that breeder setup. But first, we're going to cover a naturalistic setup. Now, if you want to keep your picta as best as you possibly can, as close to their natural setup as you possibly can, a naturalistic setup is the way to go. And when I talk about naturalistic, of course, I'm talking about bioactive. For size, maximum is as big as you want to go. Minimum is about a 10-gallon setup. A 10-gallon is 20 by 10 inches. For lighting, either a fluorescent light or an LED will work just fine on top of the enclosure. Is UVB important for Paroedura picta? All I can say is that it certainly is beneficial to these geckos. I could talk about the new VivTech UVB bulbs, but let me just go ahead and put a link right here. Remember what we said about heat? Low 90s is adequate for these animals and ambient for the rest of their enclosure. I keep our enclosures about 70% ambient, and that other 30% I keep warm in the low 90s. The safest and most efficient way to maintain that heat is either from a reptile heat mat or FlexWatt heat tape. If you do bioactive enclosures, you know all about the substrate, but let me cover that just for a moment. We start with a drainage layer. We put a screen over the drainage layer. We add dirt, and I like to use some type of a jungle mix or a koi fiber, some kind of a peat moss addition to that substrate. I mix it all together. I go ahead and add that in, throw some leaves in, throw some cork bark, certainly maintain a moss, sphagnum moss area for moisture, and then I go ahead and add my isopod, some kind of a cleanup crew. Remember what I said about Paroedura picta loving to climb? Well, now's the time that you can add some cork bark or some other kind of decorations that they love to climb on. Avoid thin branches. You want to use a little bit of a thicker branch and make sure that they don't go all the way to the top of the enclosure, because the Paroedura picta will go all the way up. And that's your setup. Oh yeah, I forgot. Water dish and a food dish, of course. One thing I really love to do with Paroedura picta is to have some kind of a decor real close to the substrate so they can get in underneath that hide and they can get close to the substrate. I like to keep that substrate under that hide a little moisture so it helps with their hydration. And finally, you can certainly add live plants, as that will help the whole hydration of the enclosure. Pictas don't need to be misted every single day, but if you could mist them every other day, every third day, they would really appreciate that. And now onto the breeding setup, which is completely different than the naturalistic setup. And I want to emphasize real quick, this is only for breeding. It's not to display the animals. It's not how all of your animals should be shown or kept. This is for the very experienced breeder. Now, we'll be covering a lot of breeding details in the third video of this series, focused on breeding, but for their setup, let's talk about that. It's a basic 12 to 15 quart sterilite type of tub. For lighting, we use ambient room lighting. Heat's provided by a 3 or a 4 inch flex wet heat tape strip on the back of their enclosure that keeps about 25 to 30% of their enclosure around that 90 to 92 degree range. The rest of their enclosure is room temperature. For substrate, you can again set it up fairly close to the bioactive enclosure, but we use sand. I really like to use sand in the breeder enclosures to keep it as simple as we possibly can. I use Reptilite. It's a very dust-free sand. We keep about a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch in the enclosure. For their decor and hides, this is where it really changes from a bioactive naturalistic setup. We keep it as simple as possible. A couple of overturned flower pot saucers with little notches cut in them for hides. We might put a piece of cork bark. We might put a small piece of plastic plant in there as well. We place a hide both on the warm side of the enclosure and on the cool side and let them choose where they want to hide. Don't forget that water dish. Don't forget that food dish. And in the food dish, make sure that you have some kind of a mix of good supplements, calcium with D3, and a good vitamin mix. Here's one of the keys to this setup. Make sure that you have a moist area in the enclosure under one of the hides. When we water the enclosure, we lift up one of the hides and water a little bit of the sand area to keep that hide area moist. Again, this should be sufficient, but if you want to mist every 3 days, they certainly would appreciate that as well. We're going to be talking in detail on video number 5 of this series, daily maintenance, but let's talk in general about the care of these Paroedura picta. We give them a myriad of different live foods, such as mealworms, crickets, dubias, but our staple food for this species is mealworms. We give them lots and lots of mealworms. An adult Paroedura picta will eat about 3 to 4 adult mealworms a day. And that could vary significantly per animal. The general rule in feeding animals is don't give them something that's longer than the width of their heads, but Paroedura picta, they'll take a big food item. An adult pictus will easily take an adult mealworm, and it will easily take an adult cricket, and it will easily take a 1/2 inch dubia. We feed every 2 to 3 days, and we'll go into the enclosure, make sure that the old food is out of there, and add new food. Our feeding routine also includes making sure that the water dish is filled. If it looks dirty at all, we throw that water out and we add new water. If the dish itself looks dirty, we'll take that dish and go ahead and replace it with a new dish. I bet you didn't think it was that easy. Their setups are that easy. The care of Paroedura picta is that easy. We have a playlist that you can watch right now. I'll throw the link up here and check out some of the videos that we've done on Paroedura picta. If you have any questions whatsoever, leave them down in the comments below and I'll make sure that I get to them usually within the same day. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it. Like, subscribe if you would. We'll see you next video.